Get a job and stop being a leech. My daughter-in-law screamed at me during Sunday dinner. I just smiled and chuckled softly. What Carmen didn't know was that I owned half the businesses in town and had $10 million sitting in my bank account. So I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Honey, you might want to start packing your bags tonight. I'll tell you everything. First, let me thank you for watching Granny's Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout-out in our next video." Today's special shout-out goes to Beatrice Britt from Florida. Thank you for being part of our family. Now, let me tell you everything. My name is Rose, and for 4 long years I've been playing a game. Not the fun kind, but the kind where you pretend to be poor so you can see who really cares about you. The phone call came on a cold Monday morning. My son Jake's voice sounded nervous, like he always did when Carmen was listening nearby. "Mom, would you like to come for dinner this Sunday? Carmen's making her special chicken." Special. I almost snorted. The woman burned toast on a regular basis, but I'd learned to keep my mouth shut over the years. "That sounds wonderful, dear. What time should I arrive?" 6 o'clock sharp. "And Mom," he paused, and I could practically hear Carmen whispering orders in the background. "Maybe wear something a bit nicer this time? You know Carmen likes things to look proper." Proper. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror after hanging up. My gray hair was messy, no makeup on my face, wearing the same old sweater I'd worn to their house many times before. For 4 years this had been my act. The struggling grandmother, barely making ends meet in her tiny rental house, depending on her son's help to survive. Sunday evening came with a bitter wind that cut right through my thin coat. I walked the 8 blocks to their house, the same path I'd taken dozens of times since my husband Frank died. The house looked exactly like it did when I secretly bought it for them as a wedding present 9 years ago. They had no idea, of course. Jake opened the door wearing that fake smile he'd gotten so good at. "Hi, Mom. Please come in." He hugged me quickly, the kind of hug that felt like he was checking off a list. At 36, my son had grown into someone I barely knew anymore. Still handsome, still my boy, but there was something empty behind his eyes that hadn't been there before he married Carmen. "Rose." Carmen's voice cut through the warm house like broken glass. She appeared from the kitchen, her bright red hair perfectly curled, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. At 31, she had the kind of beauty that demanded everyone's attention, even when she'd done nothing to deserve it. "Hello, Carmen. Thank you for inviting me over." She looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Of course. Family dinner after all. The dining room table was set with their fancy dishes, the ones they saved for people who mattered. I noticed right away that while Jake and Carmen had matching everything, my place setting was different. Chipped plates, a cracked glass, a bent spoon. Small things that told me exactly what Carmen thought of me. "Mom, sit over there." Jake pointed to the chair at the far end, as far away from both of them as possible. I sat down without saying anything, folding my hands as Carmen brought out the chicken with dramatic flair. "I hope you enjoy it," she said, though her voice made it clear she didn't care if I liked it or not. "It's my grandmother's secret recipe." Took a bite. It was dry and tasteless, clearly overcooked. "It's delicious," I said anyway. The conversation crawled along for the first 20 minutes. Jake talked about his job at the insurance company, being careful not to mention how he'd been passed over for another promotion. Carmen dominated most of the talking, going on about her yoga classes, her shopping trips, her plans to redo the kitchen. "We're thinking about getting new cabinets," she announced, cutting her chicken into tiny pieces. "Something more modern. What we have now looks so outdated." I remembered helping them pick out those cabinets when they'd first moved in. Carmen had loved them then, said they were perfect, but that was before she decided everything in her life needed an upgrade. "That sounds expensive," I said quietly. Carmen's eyes flashed with anger. "Well, some people care about making their homes beautiful. Some people understand you have to spend money on quality things." The insult was clear. I wasn't beautiful or quality, and definitely not worth spending money on. I took another bite of the terrible chicken and stayed quiet. Actually, Mom, Jake started, and I could hear he didn't want to say what came next. We need to talk to you about something. I put down my fork and waited. Carmen leaned forward, putting on what she probably thought was a caring expression. Rose, we've been worried about you, living alone in that tiny house, struggling to pay your bills. It's been 4 years since Frank died, and you're still not doing well. I'm doing fine, I said softly. Are you really? Carmen's voice took on that talking down to you tone she used when she wanted to sound helpful while being mean. You can barely pay your rent. You buy your clothes at garage sales. You don't even own a car anymore. All true from where they sat. What they didn't know was that every choice had been on purpose. The small house was paid for in cash. The garage sale clothes were just a costume. Not having a car was because I liked to walk, not because I couldn't afford 12 cars if I wanted them. I manage okay, I said. Managing isn't really living, Mom, Jake said, and for just a moment, I heard real worry in his voice. It gave me hope that somewhere underneath Carmen's control, my real son still existed. But then Carmen took over again. The truth is, Rose, we can't keep helping you forever. Jake works hard for his money, and we have our own dreams to think about. We want to buy a bigger house soon, and we need to be smart with our money. I looked at my son, waiting for him to correct her, to remind her that their help was just occasional dinners and birthday cards with $5 inside. He said nothing. Carmen continued, getting braver because of his silence. What we're trying to say is, maybe it's time you thought about getting a job. You're only 66. Lots of people your age still work. The grocery store is always looking for people to bag groceries. The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. Grocery store bagger. After running 3 successful restaurants with Frank for 25 years, after building enough wealth to buy their entire neighborhood, she wanted me to bag groceries for minimum wage. A job, I repeated slowly. Yes. Carmen's eyes lit up like she'd just solved world hunger. Something to give you purpose, independence, self-worth. Self-worth. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I've been thinking about your situation for weeks, Carmen went on, clearly proud of herself. And I figured out what the real problem is. You've gotten too comfortable letting other people take care of you, letting Jake support you. It's not healthy for anyone. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something much more dangerous. Is that what you think I am? Yes. Someone who needs support. Well, Carmen glanced at Jake for backup. Let's be honest. You depend on us for everything. Every time you have a problem, every time something breaks, who do you call? The answer was nobody. I hadn't asked them for a single penny since Frank's funeral. But in Carmen's mind, my very existence was a burden on them. I see, I said quietly. Don't take it personally, Carmen continued, getting more excited about her speech. It's just that Jake and I are trying to build something here. We're young, we have goals, and we can't constantly worry about supporting someone who won't help herself. Won't help herself. The words echoed in my mind as I looked at this woman who'd never worked a day in her life, who spent Jake's paycheck on designer purses and spa days, who lived in a house she didn't know I owned while telling me I was lazy. Carmen, I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Yes. I looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time in 4 years, I let her see something real. Something that made her lean back in her chair like she was suddenly afraid. You have absolutely no idea what's about to happen to you. The silence that followed was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Carmen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. What did you just say? She finally managed to ask. I stood up slowly, taking my time, making every movement count. Thank you for dinner. The chicken was exactly what I expected from you. I walked toward the front door, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind me, I could hear Carmen's sharp whisper. Did she just threaten me? At the door, I turned back one more time. Both of them were staring at me from the dining room doorway. Jake looked confused and scared. Carmen looked like someone had just slapped her across the face. Oh, and Carmen, I said, my hand on the doorknob. About that job advice you gave me. What about it? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile at all. You might want to start looking for one yourself. Very soon. 5 days passed before Jake called. I'd been waiting for it, naturally. Carmen wouldn't have let him sleep until he got answers about my strange behavior at dinner. I was in my small house, sitting by the window with my morning coffee when the phone rang. Mom! His voice was careful, like he was talking to someone who might be crazy. Can we please talk? Of course, sweetheart. Would you like to come over? There was a long pause. In 4 years, Jake had never once visited my house. He'd offered to help me move in, but I'd said no. He'd mentioned stopping by for coffee, but Carmen always had some excuse about why that wouldn't work. Now, faced with actually seeing how his mother lived, he sounded unsure. Yes. Okay. I'll be there in an hour. I spent the next 60 minutes getting ready for the most important conversation I'd had with my son in years. I made his favorite coffee, the expensive kind I kept hidden in the back of my cabinet. I put away the financial papers I'd been looking at. I changed from my usual garage sale sweater into something slightly nicer, though still carefully modest. When he arrived, Jake looked around the small house with barely hidden pity. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, furniture that looked like it came from yard sales, which some of it actually had. The rest I'd bought specifically to look poor. Mom, this place is... He struggled for words. Small. I suggested helpfully. I was going to say depressing. I poured him coffee in one of my good cups, another little luxury I kept hidden most of the time. He took a sip and looked surprised. This is really expensive coffee. I treat myself sometimes. We sat across from each other at my small kitchen table. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Jake cleared his throat. About last Sunday night. Yes. Carmen's really upset. She thinks you threatened her. I looked at him steadily. What do you think? He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I think something's going on with you that I don't understand. You've been acting different lately. Distant. And then Sunday, the way you looked at Carmen, the things you said. The things I said were the truth. What does that mean, Mom? You told her she has no idea what's about to happen to her. That sounds like a threat to me. I took a sip of my coffee, thinking carefully about my words. The time for complete honesty hadn't come yet, but I could give him a peek behind the curtain. Jake, do you remember what your father used to say about people who mistake kindness for weakness? He said they eventually learn the difference the hard way. Exactly. I set down my cup. For 4 years I've been kind and patient. I've watched your wife treat me like I'm worthless, like I'm an embarrassment, like I'm a problem that needs to be solved. I've listened to her advice about how I should live my life, what I should do with my time, how I should dress, what I should eat. Jake looked uncomfortable. She's just trying to help you. Is she? Or is she trying to make me disappear in the most polite way possible? Mom, that's not. Let me ask you something. I leaned forward. When was the last time Carmen asked me how I was feeling? Not how I was doing with money, not whether I needed help with bills, but how I was actually feeling as a person. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. When was the last time she asked about my hobbies, my interests, my friends? When was the last time she treated me like a human being instead of like a burden? Jake stared into his coffee cup. She's not. She doesn't mean to be cold. Doesn't she? The silence stretched between us like a rope. Finally Jake looked up. So what are you saying? That you're going to cut us out of your life? I'm saying that some people are about to learn that actions have consequences. That still sounds like a threat to me. I stood up and walked to the small bookshelf in my living room. Hidden behind a row of old books was a thick folder. I pulled it out and came back to the table. Jake, I said, opening the folder, there's something I need to tell you about your mother. Inside the folder were bank statements, investment records, property deeds, documents I'd kept hidden for 4 years, waiting for exactly this moment. His eyes got wide as he started to understand what he was looking at. "Mom, what is all this? This is who I really am." I watched his face as he flipped through page after page. Bank balances with numbers he'd never imagined. Investment accounts worth millions. Property deeds for houses, office buildings, pieces of land in 4 different states. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Your father and I were very successful, Jake. Much more successful than we ever told anyone. When he died, I inherited everything. I'm worth about $10 million. He stared at me like I'd just told him I was from another planet. But you live here in this tiny house. You shop at garage sales. You don't even have a car. By choice, sweetheart. All by choice. Why?" I closed the folder and looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and watched slowly disappear under his wife's influence. Because I needed to know who would love me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. I watched understanding dawn in his eyes as he realized what the last 4 years had really been about. "You've been testing us. I've been protecting myself." "From what?" "From people like your wife." Jake's hands were shaking as he put down his coffee cup. "Mom, this is crazy. You let us think you were poor. You let Carmen think. I let Carmen show me exactly who she really is. And she did over and over again for 4 years. But I'm your son." "Yes, you are. And I needed to know if you were still my son or if you'd become something else entirely." He flinched like I'd hit him. "That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without Carmen making you do it? When was the last time you stood up for me when she was being cruel?" Each question was like a knife and I could see them hitting their target. I never thought. I didn't realize she was being that bad. Or you chose not to see it because it was easier that way. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally Jake spoke, his voice barely audible. "What happens now?" I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. My son, who'd inherited his father's kind eyes and gentle heart, at least until he'd met Carmen. My son, who used to bring me dandelions when he was 6 and tell me I was the prettiest mom in the world. My son, who'd grown into a man who let his wife humiliate his mother without saying a word. "Now," I said softly, "we find out if it's too late for you to remember who you used to be. And Carmen." I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a kind expression. Carmen is about to discover that some people aren't as helpless as they appear to be. "Mom, what are you planning?" "Justice," I said simply. "Long overdue justice." Jake stood up suddenly, walking to the window. "This is insane. You can't just..." "What?" "Punish her for 4 years of marriage problems. 4 years of calculated cruelty," I corrected. 4 years of treating me like garbage while living in a house you only have because of the connections your father and I built over 25 years. That stopped him cold. "What do you mean? Did you think that insurance job just fell into your lap? Your father made 3 phone calls to get you that interview. We've been helping behind the scenes your entire adult life." His face went pale. "How much of my life has been a lie?" "None of it was a lie, sweetheart. But some of it was protected." I stood and walked to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I love you, Jake. I've loved you since before you were born. But love doesn't mean accepting abuse, not even from family." He turned to face me, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be. "What should I do?" "That's up to you. But I want you to think about something." "What?" "In 4 years of marriage, has Carmen ever once encouraged you to spend time with me? Has she ever suggested that maybe I might have something valuable to offer besides money?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. "That's what I thought." I squeezed his arm gently. "Some big changes are coming, sweetheart. When they happen, you'll have to decide which side you want to be on." "Is that a threat?" It's a promise, I said. And unlike some people in your life, I always keep my promises. I gave them a week to think about what I'd told Jake. A week for him to go home, look at his wife with new eyes, and decide what kind of man he wanted to be. A week for Carmen to wonder what exactly I'd meant by my words at their dinner table. The call came on a Thursday morning. Carmen's voice, sharp and demanding, shattered the peaceful quiet of my house. Rose, we need to talk. Right now. Good morning to you too, Carmen. Don't play games with me. Jake told me about your little show about the money. I smiled, settling into my favorite chair with my coffee. Did he now? Yes, he did. And I want to know what kind of sick game you've been playing with us. What kind of game do you think I've been playing? Her voice went up higher. You let us think you were poor. You sat there and let me worry about you. Let me try to help you. And all this time you were secretly rich. Let her worry about me. Let her try to help. The rewriting of history was breathtaking even for Carmen. I see. And how exactly did you help me, dear? We invited you for dinner. We included you in family things. You mean the dinners where you gave me broken dishes and told me to get a job bagging groceries? Silence. Then. You're coming over tonight. We're going to settle this once and for all. Am I? Yes. 7 o'clock. And Rose, you owe us an explanation. The line went dead. I set the phone down and finished my coffee, thinking about the conversation ahead. Then I walked to my bedroom closet and pushed aside the garage sale cardigans and discount dresses. In the back, wrapped in plastic covers, hung the clothes I used to wear. The clothes that showed who I really was. I picked out a navy blue dress, elegant but not flashy. Real jewelry, not fake pieces. Shoes that cost more than Carmen spent on her hair in a month. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who could buy and sell everything Carmen had ever touched without checking her bank balance first. It was time to stop hiding. I arrived at their house at exactly 7 o'clock. The same house I'd purchased for them 9 years ago, though they'd never known it. The same house whose payments I'd been quietly making through a management company, letting them believe Jake's salary covered everything. Jake answered the door, and his eyes went wide when he saw me. Mom, you look different. Like yourself, he said quietly. Like you used to look when Dad was alive. Carmen appeared behind him, and her expression was pure poison. She'd dressed for war too, in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's car payments. But next to the quiet confidence of real wealth, her attempts at looking important seemed like a child playing dress-up. Well, well, she said, looking me up and down. The poor widow has quite the secret wardrobe. Among other things, I replied calmly. We moved to the living room, the same room I'd helped them decorate when they'd first moved in. I took a seat on the couch I'd helped them choose, in the house I'd bought, surrounded by the life I'd made possible for them. Okay, Carmen said, positioning herself like a lawyer about to make her case. Let's hear it. The whole truth. What would you like to know? Everything. How much money do you really have? Why did you lie to us? What kind of person pretends to be poor for 4 years? I folded my hands in my lap and looked at her calmly. The kind of person who wants to know who her real friends are. Friends. Carmen's laugh was sharp and bitter. I'm your daughter-in-law, not your friend. Family doesn't lie to family. Doesn't it? Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you told the mailman I was getting forgetful and might need to go to a nursing home soon. Carmen's face went white. Jake turned to stare at her in shock. I never said that. You told Mrs. Patterson next door that I was showing signs of memory loss. You suggested to the grocery store clerk that I might need someone to make decisions for me soon. You've been building a story about my failing mental health for months. That's not true. Or not something you expected me to find out about. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Carmen, is that true? She spun toward him, eyes blazing. I was worried. She was acting strange, saying weird things, dressing like she was homeless. I thought she might be losing her mind. Or, I said softly, You were setting things up so you could have me declared incompetent and get access to what you thought was Frank's life insurance money. The accusation hung in the air like a sword. Carmen's mouth opened and closed without sound. That's crazy, she finally managed. Why would I do that? I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Because 2 months ago, you called a lawyer who specializes in elder care. You asked about the process for taking control of an elderly relative's finances when they're not mentally capable anymore. Jake shot to his feet. What? I opened the envelope and pulled out printed emails, phone records, notes from consultations. You wanted to know how quickly the process could be completed, and whether there were ways to speed it up if the relative had significant money. How did you get those? Carmen's voice was barely a whisper. Money opens many doors, dear. Including the ones you thought were locked. Jake was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Carmen, please tell me this isn't true. It's not what it looks like, she said desperately. I was just worried about her. I wanted to know what our options were if she really was getting sick. Funny thing, I continued. The lawyer's notes show you were particularly interested in whether guardianship would give you access to bank accounts and investment money. You specifically asked about selling assets for the patient's own good. The color drained completely from Carmen's face. She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Mom, Jake said, his voice hollow. Please tell me you're making this up. I'm afraid not, sweetheart. But why? Why would she do this? I looked at Carmen, who was staring at the floor, and felt something that might have been pity if she deserved it. Because she never loved you, Jake. She loved what she thought you could provide. And when it became clear that your salary alone wasn't enough to fund the lifestyle she wanted, she started looking for other sources of income. That's not true, Carmen whispered. Isn't it? Then explain the credit card debt you've been hiding from your husband. The shopping sprees you've been paying for with cash advances. The jewelry you've been pawning and replacing with fake copies. Jake's face went white. What are you talking about? I pulled out another set of documents. Your wife has been living beyond your means for 3 years. She owes $67,000 on cards you don't know about. Carmen, is this true? She finally looked up, and her face was streaked with tears. But they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of rage. You, she hissed at me. You manipulative, evil. You set me up. I didn't set you up, dear. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. She stood up, swaying slightly. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won something. You wanted to destroy my marriage, and you did it. Congratulations. I didn't destroy your marriage, Carmen. You did that yourself. The moment you decided my son was just a stepping stone to something better. I love Jake. You love what Jake represents. Security, status, a meal ticket. But you've never loved him. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. Show everyone what you really are. I walked closer to her, close enough that she had to look up to meet my eyes. You want to know what's really going to happen here, Carmen? What? You're going to pack your things, and you're going to leave this house tonight. She laughed, high and wild. You can't make me leave my own home. Actually, I can. I pulled out one more document from my purse. The deed to the house, with my name clearly visible as the owner. This house belongs to me. It always has. You and Jake have been living here as my guests for 9 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stared at the deed like it was written in a foreign language. Mom, what does this mean? It means your wife has 20 minutes to pack a bag and get out of my house. Carmen was shaking now, anger and fear fighting in her expression. You can't do this. Have rights. Legal rights. You're not a tenant. You're a guest who's worn out her welcome. I folded the deed and put it away. 20 minutes, Carmen. After that, I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Jake. She turned to him desperately. Say something. This is our home. But Jake was still staring at the spot where the deed had been, processing everything he'd just learned. "Jake!" she screamed. He looked up at her, and his expression was that of a man seeing clearly for the first time in years. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my mother's house." Carmen's face crumpled, but I felt no satisfaction in her tears. Only tired relief that the act was finally over. "This isn't over," she said, looking at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." I smiled, and I made sure she could see exactly how little her threats meant to me. "Oh, but it is, dear. This is just the beginning of what happens to people who mistake my kindness for weakness." She ran from the room, her footsteps pounding up the stairs. I could hear her throwing things around, slamming doors, crying with rage. Jake and I stood in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his marriage, and the echoes of 4 years of lies finally brought into the light. "Mom," he said finally. "Yes. I'm sorry. I know you are, sweetheart. What happens now?" I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, thinking about second chances and the price of forgiveness. Now we find out if it's possible to rebuild what we lost. The calls started the next morning. First, my brother-in-law Michael, Frank's younger brother. His voice tight with disapproval. "Rose, what in the world has gotten into you? Carmen called me crying last night. She says you threw her out of her own home." I was sitting in my small house, still maintaining the appearance for now, drinking coffee from my chipped mug while listening to Michael's outrage. "Did she mention why?" asked mildly. "She said you've been lying about money, pretending to be poor when you're actually wealthy." "Rose, that's disturbed behavior." "Is it?" "Yes. And now you've kicked a young woman out of her home because of some family argument. Frank would be ashamed." Frank would be ashamed. The word stung because once upon a time, Michael's opinion had mattered to me. He'd been like a brother during the early years of my marriage, before Carmen had poisoned that relationship too. "Michael, did Carmen happen to mention the lawyer she contacted about having me declared mentally incompetent?" Silence. "Or the $67,000 in secret debt she's racked up?" "What are you talking about? Ask her when you're done feeling sorry for her. Ask her about the real reason she wanted access to my finances." I hung up before he could respond. The phone rang again immediately. Frank's sister Linda, with the same outrage, the same accusations, the same willful blindness to what Carmen really was. By noon, I'd received calls from 8 relatives, all repeating the same story. Poor Carmen, innocent victim of a vindictive mother-in-law who'd lost her mind with grief. I listened to each one, made mental notes about who had called, and said very little in my own defense. Let them show their true colors. Let them reveal how quickly they'd turn on family when presented with a sob story from a manipulative stranger. The most disturbing call came from my nephew Tommy, Michael's son, whom I'd helped through community college just 3 years earlier. "Aunt Rose," he said, his voice careful and professional, "I've been talking to some people about your situation." "My situation?" "Your behavior lately. The family is concerned that you might be showing signs of dementia or some other mental decline." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. Who exactly has been discussing my mental state? Well, Carmen mentioned some incidents. Strange behavior, paranoid thinking, wild accusations against family members. And now this business with throwing her out. Tommy, let me ask you something. Do you remember who paid for your last year at community college? What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. Mom and Dad helped, and I had student loans. Your parents contributed $3,000. I paid the remaining $15,000. Silence. I also paid for your sister's wedding, your mother's surgery that insurance didn't cover, and the down payment on your first apartment. All of which you know perfectly well. Aunt Rose. So when you talk about my mental decline, you might want to consider whether someone with dementia would remember those details quite so clearly. He hung up without another word. The pattern was becoming clear. Carmen hadn't just disappeared quietly into the night. She'd launched a campaign, painting herself as the victim of an unstable older woman who'd suddenly snapped. And like poison spreading through water, Her version of events was infecting the entire family network. 3 days later, Jake called. His voice was strained, exhausted. "Mom, can we meet? We need to talk." "Of course." "Where?" "Not at the house. Carmen's been. She's been calling everyone. The family's in chaos." We met at a small diner downtown, the kind of quiet place where two people could have a difficult conversation without being overheard. Jake looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled, his usually neat hair messy. "She's destroying me," he said without any introduction. "What do you mean?" "Carmen. She's not just telling everyone her version of what happened. She's making up complete lies." I wasn't surprised, but I waited for him to continue. "She told my boss that you're suffering from dementia and that I've been distracted at work, worried about your mental health. She suggested they might want to consider whether my job performance has been affected." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Not satisfied with destroying her own reputation, she was now trying to sabotage Jake's career. "What did your boss say?" "He was understanding. Suggested I might want to look into family medical leave, maybe take some time off to deal with family health issues." "And you told him?" "What could I tell him? That my wife is a liar who tried to have my mother declared incompetent so she could steal her money. That I've been living in a house my mother owns without knowing it. That my entire adult life has been built on things I never understood." His voice was getting louder, drawing looks from other customers. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Keep your voice down, sweetheart." He laughed bitterly. "She's been 2 steps ahead of me this whole time. By the time I figured out what she was doing, she'd already turned half the family against you and made me look like either a liar or a fool at work. What else? She's living with her sister now, crying to anyone who will listen about how you manipulated our marriage, how you set traps for her, how you're dangerous and unstable." I sipped my coffee, thinking Carmen was more clever than I'd given her credit for. She'd turned her humiliation into a weapon, her exposure into martyrdom. "There's more," Jake continued. "She's talked to a lawyer." "About what?" "About the house. She's claiming she has tenant rights, that you can't just kick her out without proper notice. She's also claiming you forced her to leave under threat." "And what did the lawyer tell her?" "That she doesn't have a case. But here's the thing, Mom. She's not trying to win. She's trying to make our lives miserable." He nodded. It was exactly what I'd expected from someone like Carmen once she realized she'd lost everything. "Show me," I said. "What?" "Show me what she's been telling people. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with." Jake pulled out his phone and opened his social media. The posts were expertly crafted, each one designed to get maximum sympathy while maintaining believability. "Going through a difficult time with family. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. Please keep me in your prayers. Learning hard lessons about manipulation and emotional abuse. Grateful for friends who see through the lies." When someone spends years pretending to be something they're not, what else are they lying about? Trust your gut feelings. Each post had dozens of comments expressing support, outrage on her behalf, condemnation of unnamed family members who'd obviously wronged this poor young woman. "She's good," I admitted. "She's evil." "No, she's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" I handed him back his phone and leaned forward. "The kind that reveal more than they meant to." "I don't understand." "Look at the pattern, Jake. What's the one thing missing from all her posts?" He scrolled through them again, frowning. "I don't see it. She never once mentions loving you. Not once. She talks about being betrayed, being manipulated, being lied to, but she never says she's heartbroken about losing her marriage. She never says she misses her husband." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Because she doesn't. Because she never did. This isn't grief, sweetheart. This is rage at being caught. We sat in silence for a moment, processing the depth of Carmen's deception and the scope of the damage she was trying to inflict. "What do we do?" Jake asked finally. I smiled, and I made sure he could see that whatever sympathy I might have felt for his wife had completely disappeared. We let her keep digging. What? Right now, Carmen thinks she's winning. She thinks she successfully painted herself as the victim and us as the villains. She's feeling confident, maybe even triumphant. And that helps us how? Because confident people get careless. They overreach. They make the kind of mistakes that reveal who they really are. You think she'll mess up? I don't think it, sweetheart. I know it. Because I've been watching her for 4 years. And I know exactly what kind of person she is. I reached into my purse and pulled out another manila envelope. This one thicker than the others. What's that? Insurance. What kind of insurance? The kind that proves everything I've been telling you about your wife's true nature. Jake's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean that while Carmen was busy planning my downfall, I was busy documenting hers. Every financial lie, every manipulation she attempted, every cruel thing she did, it's all here. Why haven't you used it? Because I wanted to give her enough rope to hang herself with. And judging by her behavior over the last few days, I'd say she's about to tie the knot. Mom, what are you planning? I stood up, gathering my things with the careful precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for a very long time. Justice, sweetheart. Pure, simple justice. And what does that look like? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and watched nearly lose himself to a woman who'd never deserved him. It looks like the truth. All of it. Every ugly, manipulative, calculating piece of it. When? Very soon, I said. Because if there's one thing I've learned about people like Carmen, it's that they can't resist trying to land one final blow. And when she does, we'll be ready. I didn't have to wait long for Carmen to make her fatal mistake. It came exactly 1 week after our conversation at the diner, in the form of a phone call that would expose everything she really was. The call came to my house at 1:15 in the afternoon. I was reviewing some business papers when the phone rang, the caller ID showing a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Richardson. This is Detective James Wilson with the Metro Police Department. My blood went cold. Yes, sir. I need to ask you some questions about a report that's been filed against you. Allegations of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I set down my papers very carefully. I'm sorry, what? A young woman named Carmen Richardson has filed a complaint alleging that you've been the victim of financial abuse by family members, and that those same family members are now retaliating against her for trying to help you. The audacity was breathtaking. Even for Carmen, this crossed a line I hadn't expected her to cross. Detective Wilson, I think there's been some confusion. Ma'am, could you come down to the station? We'd like to get your side of the story. Of course. I'll be there within the hour. I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, Patricia Stevens, a woman who'd been handling my legal affairs since Frank's death. Patricia, I need you to meet me at the Metro Police Department immediately. What's happened? My former daughter-in-law has accused my son and me of elder abuse and financial exploitation. There was a pause. That's a serious charge, Rose. Yes, it is. And completely made up. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I changed into one of my better outfits, gathered every document I thought I might need, and drove to the police station in the Mercedes I kept parked in a garage across town. It was time to stop hiding who I really was. Detective Wilson was a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He looked surprised when I walked into the interview room with Patricia, both of us dressed like the successful professionals we were. Mrs. Richardson, I have to say you're not quite what I expected based on the report we received. What exactly did the report say? He consulted his notes. According to Ms. Carmen Richardson, you're a vulnerable elderly woman who's been systematically financially abused by your son and his wife. She claims they've been stealing from you, controlling your access to money, and forcing you to live in poor conditions. I looked at Patricia, who nodded slightly. She also claims that when she tried to help you, your son became violent and threatening, and that you've been turned against her through manipulation and possibly mental abuse. I see. And what evidence did she provide to support these claims? She provided photos of your house, which she says demonstrate the poor conditions you're forced to live in. She also provided what she claims are financial documents showing problems with your accounts. Detective Wilson pulled out a folder and showed me printed photographs of my small house, pictures taken through windows showing the modest furniture, the small kitchen, the carefully maintained appearance of poverty I'd been cultivating. She also provided these, the detective continued, pulling out photocopied bank statements that showed my checking account, the one I used for daily expenses. The balance was consistently low, rarely more than a few $100s. Detective, I said calmly, may I ask when these photos were taken? She says within the last month. And she obtained them how? She says she was concerned about your welfare and wanted to document your living conditions. So she was spying on me. Detective Wilson looked uncomfortable. She characterized it as conducting welfare checks. Patricia leaned forward. Detective, has anyone bothered to verify any of Miss Carmen Richardson's claims? We're in the process of investigating. Good, I said, reaching into my purse, because I have some documents that might interest you. I placed my real bank statements on the table, the ones showing my actual financial position. Detective Wilson's eyes widened as he processed the numbers. Mrs. Richardson, these show assets of approximately $10 million. Yes, but the statements Miss Carmen provided show only one account, my household expense account. I maintain multiple accounts for different purposes. Patricia pulled out additional documents. Detective, my client is a wealthy widow who chose to live modestly for personal reasons. She's never been financially abused, and she's certainly never been controlled by her son. Then why would Miss Carmen make these accusations? I smiled grimly. Because she's the one who attempted financial exploitation, and when she was caught, she decided to try one last desperate move. I pulled out the envelope I'd shown Jake at the diner, the one containing evidence of Carmen's real activities. These documents show that Ms. Carmen Richardson contacted an elder law attorney about obtaining guardianship over me. She specifically asked about gaining access to what she believed were substantial assets. Detective Wilson studied the documents, his expression growing more serious. She also accumulated over $67,000 in secret debt during her marriage. Debt she was hiding from her husband while pressuring him to get money from me. How did you obtain these documents? Legal investigation services. When someone is attempting to have you declared incompetent, you tend to want to know everything about their motivations and methods. I pulled out more papers. These show her online searches for information about elder abuse, conservatorship laws, and how to prove someone is mentally incompetent. All conducted in the weeks before she began spreading rumors about my mental health. The detective was quiet for a long moment, reviewing everything I'd provided. Mrs. Richardson, if what you're telling me is true, then Miss Carmen has filed a false police report. Yes, she has. That's a serious crime. Yes, it is. Detective Wilson looked at Patricia. What does your client want to do about this? We want Miss Carmen prosecuted to the full extent of the law, she said without hesitation. And, I added, we want a restraining order preventing her from contacting me, my son, or any member of our family. The detective nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with the district attorney's office, but based on what you've shown me, it appears Miss Carmen Richardson has committed several crimes. What happens now? Yes. Now we arrest her. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my real home, the luxury townhouse I'd called home for the past 4 years, when Jake called. Mom, the police just called me. They arrested Carmen. I know. You know. You. Mom, where are you? I went by your house and it's empty. I looked around my real home, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, the one filled with the antiques and artwork Frank and I had collected over 25 years of marriage. I'm at home, sweetheart. What do you mean? I mean I'm at my real home. The small house was just another costume. Silence. Then, Mom, I don't understand anything anymore. Come to the Riverside Towers on Oak Street, Unit 14. I'll explain everything. 40 minutes later, Jake stood in my real living room, staring at surroundings that probably cost more than most people made in 2 years. This is where you've been living. This is where I've always lived. Even when I was visiting you in that little house, I came home to this. He sank into one of my leather chairs, his head in his hands. She really tried to have you declared incompetent. Yes. And she filed a false police report. Yes. Why? Why go that far? I poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than Carmen spent on groceries in a month. Because she's not just greedy, Jake. She's genuinely vindictive. When she realized she couldn't get what she wanted through manipulation, she decided to destroy us both out of spite. What happens to her now? She'll be prosecuted for filing a false report, attempted fraud, and possibly stalking. She'll likely serve some time in jail, and she'll definitely have a criminal record. He was quiet for a long time, processing everything. I feel like I don't know anything about my own life, he said finally. You know the important things. You know I love you. You know you're a good man who got caught up with a bad woman. You know you have a second chance to build something real. Do I? Do we? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and protected and almost lost to someone who'd never deserved him. That depends. On what? On whether you can forgive yourself for not seeing who she really was, and whether you can forgive me for the test I put you through. You were protecting yourself. But I was also testing you. And that's not fair. A mother shouldn't have to test her child's love. Jake looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be before Carmen had gotten her claws into him. Can we start over? I'd like that very much. No more tests, no more games, no more lies. No more tests, I agreed. But sweetheart. Yeah. If you ever bring home another woman like Carmen, I'm moving to Florida and not leaving a forwarding address. For the first time in months, my son laughed. Really laughed. Deal, he said. Definitely deal. 8 months later, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold and orange when Jake called with news I'd been expecting. The divorce is final, he said. His voice lighter than it had been in years. How do you feel? Free. Scared but free. I smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. Freedom after long captivity was always a mixture of relief and uncertainty. And Carmen, sentenced to 4 months in county jail, 2 years probation, and she has to pay restitution for the legal costs her false report created. Good. She also has a restraining order that prevents her from contacting either of us for 3 years. Even better. There was a pause. Then Jake asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When did you know? When did you know she was going to try something like this? I sipped my wine, thinking back to the moment I'd first realized what Carmen truly was. The 3rd week after your father's funeral, she came to visit me, supposedly to check on how I was coping. I remember that visit clearly. She spent 10 minutes asking about my grief and 50 minutes asking about Frank's life insurance, his business interests, what kind of inheritance I'd be leaving you someday. She was grieving too. Dad had been like a father to her. No, sweetheart. She was calculating. There's a difference. I could hear him processing this, probably remembering that visit with new understanding. That's when I decided to test her, to see if my suspicions were correct. And they were. Unfortunately, yes. But Jake, I want you to understand something. I didn't do all this just to prove Carmen was terrible. I did it to save you. Save me from what? From a life with someone who would have destroyed you piece by piece. She wouldn't have stopped with trying to control your mother. Eventually, she would have controlled every aspect of your life. The silence stretched between us, comfortable now in a way it hadn't been for years. I have something to tell you too, he said finally. What's that? My heart clenched, half with hope and half with protective fear. I've been seeing someone. Tell me about her. Her name is Sarah. She's a librarian at the downtown branch. We met at a bookstore 4 months ago. And She doesn't know anything about our money. She thinks I'm just a regular guy with a regular job who lives in a house I inherited from my grandmother. I laughed despite myself. You told her you inherited my house? Well, technically that's true, isn't it? I mean, someday. Someday, yes. What's she like? She's normal. Kind. She volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. She drives a 12-year-old Toyota and thinks Red Lobster is fancy dining. Do you love her? Another pause, longer this time. I think I could. But Mom, I'm scared. Of what? Of not being able to tell the difference between real love and manipulation. Of making the same mistake again. I stood up and walked to the edge of my balcony, looking out over the river where my son was learning to rebuild his life. Sweetheart, can I tell you something your father used to say? What? He used to say that the difference between love and manipulation is that love makes you feel like the best version of yourself, while manipulation makes you feel like you're never good enough. I like that. How does Sarah make you feel? Like I used to feel before. Like I'm enough just as I am. Then trust that feeling and trust yourself. You're not the same man who fell for Carmen's games. You're wiser now. I hope so. I know so. But Jake. Yeah. When you're ready, I'd like to meet her. Really? Really. And this time I promise to be myself from the beginning. No tests, no costumes, no games. She might be intimidated by all this. I could hear him gesturing at what I assumed was his memory of my townhouse. Then we'll meet somewhere neutral, somewhere that puts her at ease. I've spent 4 years pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm tired of pretending. If Sarah is someone who might become important to you, then she's someone I want to know. What if she doesn't like you? Then she's not the right woman for you. And what if you don't like her? I smiled, remembering my promise about moving to Florida. Then I'll keep my opinions to myself unless you ask for them. Mom. Yes. Thank you. For what? For saving me. Even when I didn't know I needed saving. After we hung up, I stayed on the balcony as the sky darkened and the city lights began to twinkle below. I thought about the past 4 years, about the elaborate deception I'd maintained, about the pain of watching my son slowly disappear under his wife's influence. I thought about Frank, who would have handled this situation completely differently. He would have confronted Carmen directly, probably within the first month of noticing her behavior. But then again, Frank had never had to wonder whether people loved him for himself or for his money. That particular burden had fallen to me after his death. My phone buzzed with a text message. Michael, Frank's brother, the first person to call and condemn me when Carmen had launched her campaign of lies. Rose, I owe you an apology. I had lunch with Linda today, and we pieced together the timeline of what really happened. I'm ashamed that I believed Carmen's lies without even asking for your side of the story. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Michael, apology accepted. But I think we both learned something important about making judgments without all the facts. His response came quickly. We did. And Rose, I'm proud of you for protecting yourself and Jake. That took incredible strength. More messages followed over the next hour. Linda, Tommy, even some cousins I'd barely spoken to in years. All of them apologizing. All of them admitting they'd been too quick to believe Carmen's version of events. I answered each one with grace, but I made mental notes about who had jumped to condemn me and how quickly they'd done it. Some relationships could be repaired, but they would never be quite the same. The last message of the evening came from an unexpected source. Detective Wilson. Mrs. Richardson, thought you'd want to know that Miss Carmen attempted to contact you through the jail's phone system today. The call was blocked due to the restraining order, but I wanted you to be aware. I wasn't surprised. Carmen would never truly accept defeat. Even from jail, she was probably planning her next move, her next attempt to cause trouble. But for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't worried about what she might do. I'd stopped hiding. I'd stopped pretending to be vulnerable. I'd reclaimed my power, my voice, and my life. I poured myself another glass of wine and settled back into my chair. Tomorrow, I would start the process of selling the house where Jake and Carmen had lived. I'd already decided to give the proceeds to him. A real inheritance rather than the fake vulnerability I'd used as a test. Tomorrow I would also start planning for the future. Real plans, not elaborate deceptions. Maybe travel, maybe charity work, maybe just the simple pleasure of living authentically without constantly watching over my shoulder. But tonight I was content to sit on my balcony, surrounded by the luxury I'd earned and the peace I'd fought for, knowing that my son was free to build a life with someone who might actually love him. The phone rang one more time. Jake again. Mom, I forgot to ask. What are you going to do now? With your life, I mean. I looked out over the river, thinking about all the possibilities that lay ahead. I'm going to live it, I said. Openly, honestly, without apology. I'm going to be exactly who I am. And who is that? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. A woman who survived a test of her own making and came out stronger on the other side. A mother who fought for her son even when he couldn't fight for himself. A widow who honored her husband's memory by protecting what they built together. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. After I hung up, I stayed on the balcony until the wine was gone and the city had settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm. For 4 years I'd lived in the shadows, testing the people I loved, protecting myself from those who would use me. Now finally I was ready to step back into the light. Not as the grieving widow who needed protection, not as the vulnerable elderly woman who could be taken advantage of, but as Rose Richardson, successful businesswoman, devoted mother, and survivor of one of the most elaborate long-term deceptions I'd ever conceived. It had cost me 4 years of authentic living, several relationships I'd once valued, and more emotional energy than I cared to calculate. But it had saved my son, exposed a dangerous predator, and taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. As I finally headed inside to bed, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Not the tired, shabby woman I'd pretended to be, but the real me. Well-dressed, confident, unashamed of my success or my choices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new relationships to navigate, new decisions to make. But whatever came next, I would face it as myself. And that, after 4 years of elaborate pretense, felt like the greatest victory of all. Now, I'm curious about you who are listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Please comment below and let me know. And while you're here, I'm leaving 2 other stories on the screen that are favorites on Granny's Voice channel, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the very end.